On the last episode of the Keepsake box, Antonio looked legitimately hurt and confused. I felt bad for saying the words after they left my mouth, but it was too late to take them back. "Is that what you think?" he asked. Before I could answer, Antonio picked me up and sat me on his desk. He positioned his body between my legs. Antonio kissed me slowly and deliberately. He looked into my eyes and addressed me. "I've taken in everything you've said, and you're right. You are an asset to me, as are Peaches and Cream, but you're certainly wrong otherwise. You're around because I want you here. Ask yourself if I spend this amount of time with anyone else, even Sharon. That has to mean something to you, doesn't it? I know the situation isn't fair to you, but it's how we live. I'm not going to promise you anything that I won't follow through with, including monogamy. It may seem selfish to ask you to dedicate yourself to me, but I can't imagine you being with anyone else. I'll do almost anything to prevent that from happening. I love you, little girl, and not in the way that I love Cream and Peaches. I am in love with you. I'm sorry that I failed to make that obvious to you, but now that I know how you feel, I'll make it right. I will do what it takes to make sure you know where you stand with me. Will you open yourself up to the possibility of allowing me to do that?" That was the first time Antonio told me he loved me. I shook my head, indicating that I would allow him to show me where I stood. Maybe Antonio didn't know it, but I only wanted to be with him. Entertaining someone else would have felt like as much of a betrayal to myself as it would have been to him. That's how much I cared about him. Antonio kissed me while caressing my back. "I want you," he said. "Let's go to your place." I snickered. "I guess we've upgraded from office sex," I said. Antonio didn't laugh. "We can't do this here," he said. The ride to my house was extremely sexually intense. It started with a simple kiss at the stoplight. After taking off, Antonio started to unbutton my jeans with his right hand. He reached into my pants and slid my underwear to the side. I closed my eyes and reclined my head. Antonio smiled as he inserted his fingers in and out, only stopping periodically to taste them. Just as I was about to reach my climax, he stopped. I opened my eyes to find that we were parked outside of my house. Antonio smiled. "Let's go," he said. The moment we were inside, Antonio picked me up and took me into my bedroom. It was the most passionate sexual exchange that we had ever experienced. Antonio slowly stroked in and out. He whispered in my ear, only pausing to allow me to respond. He asked the questions and I answered them. He asked, "You love me, little girl?" I said, "You know I do." He said, "Tell me." I said, "I love you, baby." He said, "You want me?" I said, "You know I do." He said, "Tell me." I said, "I want you more than anything." He said, "I want you to be mine." "Will you be mine? Only mine?" I said, "Yes." Chapter 8, Taking Over. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. I fell in love with Antonio, madly in love. In my young mind, he was everything that I ever wanted and so much more. I was satisfied with what Antonio presented to me because I wasn't even aware that I should expect more. I remained comfortable in the position for about a year before I felt the itch of change. There was already a shift in the hierarchy. Peaches comfortably maintained her position at the bottom, but I had basically taken over as the new Cream. Cream didn't seem to care though. She went on about her normal business as if nothing had changed. Neither of the women ever acted any differently towards me. I was happy to knock Cream and Peaches down a couple of notches, but it wasn't ever my intention to take Sharon's place. Well, not initially. In spite of the fact that I was sleeping with Antonio, I loved and respected Sharon too much to try to take him. I was simply putting in my bid and reaping the benefits of being one of his girls. In my mind, I wasn't doing anything more to Sharon than what she had done to Cream. But after a while, I began to notice the disparity between us, and admittedly, I got jealous. I realized that Antonio was willing to invest in things for me, but he was willing to invest in Sharon. Antonio filled my gas tank, but he bought Sharon a car. He paid bills at my house, but he paid Sharon's mortgage. He got my breasts done, but he bought a salon for Sharon. Those points weren't ever lost upon me, but I was patiently waiting my turn. I was taking it all in stride until Antonio took Sharon to Jamaica for a week, and that changed everything for me. I was initially happy being taken to 5-star hotels, but I felt slighted when I realized that Antonio was going out of his way to create experiences with Sharon. He wasn't doing that with me, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I took over Sharon's clients while she was in Jamaica with Antonio. As the days went on, I started to resent her more and more. She was off creating memories with my man while I was keeping her business afloat. Adding insult to injury, I had to listen to everything that was being said around me. Women would come into the salon and brag on how well Antonio treated Sharon. I got so tired of hearing it. Antonio is so good to Sharon. I need an Antonio in my life. Blah, blah, blah. A few of them even suggested that I should aspire to be like Sharon to ensure that I could get a guy like Antonio. Get a guy like Antonio? I had a guy like Antonio. Antonio! I knew then that Sharon had to go. Well, she didn't have to go, but she certainly had to go down in the hierarchy. I spent the entire week fuming and thinking about how I was going to outwoman Sharon. My soul would not have rested otherwise. I put a plan in motion. I started racing Sharon when she and Antonio returned from Jamaica. I tend to liken our competition to an actual race. Sharon and I were competing, and Antonio was both the coach and the prize. The odds were in my favor from the very beginning. How so? Let me explain. The first factor that worked in my favor was age. I was 19 and Sharon was 26. I was younger and fresher. I had more energy and endurance, both of which are advantages in any race. Sharon obviously had a hold on Antonio, but one thing couldn't be disputed. She was older and Antonio liked younger women. No amount of effort on her behalf could make her younger. The second factor was the fact that I was being spoon-fed the formula for success by the coach. Antonio shared all of Sharon's weaknesses with me, allowing me to avoid making the same mistakes. If she didn't cook, I cooked all the time. Antonio told me that Sharon was always too tired for sex. Consequently, I was never too tired for sex, even when I was. There was no chicanery involved. I simply did what she didn't and capitalized on where she fell short. It was a formula that was as old as time. It was the equivalent of starting a race with the understanding that your competitor has an injured knee. It allows you to strategize in a way that almost certainly ensures victory. That's what Antonio did for me. The third factor was advanced knowledge. Truthfully, Sharon wasn't even aware that she was involved in a race, and that was unfortunate for her. Sharon leisurely strolled through her relationship with Antonio, comfortable and unassuming. She never attempted to walk any faster. She wasn't in a rush. I sprinted past Sharon on a regular basis. Her only critique was the fact that I was moving too fast, never knowing that she was actually losing the race. It was so easy to win when the other party wasn't even aware that they were competing. But like I said before, it was designed for me to win. I put the plan in motion as soon as Sharon and Antonio returned from Jamaica. I welcomed him back with open arms. I told him that I missed him and went above and beyond the call of duty. I didn't wait for him to tell me that Sharon was too tired to cook. I invited him over for dinner before she even thought about it. I didn't just cook. I cooked whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. Antonio would sometime arrive in the middle of the night and request a meal. Without regards to how tired I was, Antonio always got what he wanted, no questions asked. I never let Antonio go to sleep without the understanding that my body was accessible to him. I worked like a horse between the gas station, the salon, school, and Antonio. I was exhausted more often than not. But it was a no-brainer for me. I would be there to supply whatever he wanted and needed at whatever cost. I worked overtime to be anything and everything that he needed. Sharon couldn't compete. It was nearly impossible for her to be able to. And it wasn't long before I phased her out, just as she had done to Cream. I recall the exact day when I realized that I had taken Sharon's place. It was early on a Saturday morning, and I was preparing to go to work at the salon. I was finishing my breakfast when Antonio came bouncing through the door. I was surprised to see him. Antonio had a key, and he was welcome to come and go at his leisure, but it wasn't his normal tendency to even be awake that early. Antonio walked over to the table and kissed me. He had news, I could tell. "What brings you here this early?" I asked. He told me that he had a surprise for me, and he didn't want to wait for me to get off work. I wasn't surprised that Antonio had a surprise. Antonio always had a surprise for me. I would often come home to money or jewelry without ever having seen Antonio. "So what is it?" I asked. "You're gonna love it," he said, and I knew that I would. That was the thing about Antonio. He was extraordinarily observant. I never had to tell him anything. He picked up on the things that I liked and presented them to me in the most unexpected and loving ways. My wants and needs weren't ever lost upon him, even when he didn't understand them. Antonio always told me that I was strange. However, he never stopped indulging in my strangeness, and I loved that. Antonio always laughed at my musical selection, but he allowed me to sing my favorite songs at the tops of my lungs, uninhibited and unjudged. He watched me sing, laughing and shaking his head, but he never stopped me. Antonio found it strange that I never moved Grandma's dishes off of the drying mat. Yet, he never moved them either. He simply purchased a drying rack that took residence in the second sink. That became our official place for wet dishes, and we never discussed it. Antonio often talked about how I liked my grits with sugar opposed to butter and pepper. But in ordering food for me, he was always sure to order my grits with sugar. My eggs were always scrambled with lots of cheese. My bacon was always just a little too soft for his liking. Yet, he ordered my food that way every single time. Antonio always made sure to present things to my specifications. I was always made aware that he cared enough to put emphasis on the details. He always made sure that I had things the exact way I wanted them, even when my preferences were in opposition to his. Antonio loved braids, and he wanted me to wear them all the time. And even though I usually went against everything that he chose for me, he never had a problem paying. He always swore that he wouldn't, but I knew he would. Antonio paid for everything. But it wasn't just about the money. Sure, Antonio spent money on me, but he spent time as well. Our relationship reminded me of the relationship between him and Sharon. Antonio brought food for me, and also for Cassidy when she was with me, just as he did when I lived with Sharon. He remembered her favorite foods and did crazy things to make her laugh, and I loved that about him. I loved the way he loved me. I loved the fact that he loved anything that was connected to me. That's who Antonio was. But back to the surprise. Antonio took my hand and let me outside. I was astonished by what I saw. Antonio had purchased a car for me, but it wasn't just a car. It was the car, my dream car. It was a 1999 Jaguar, black with tan interior. It was the epitome of luxury at that time. I often joked that I would purchase that car if I ever won the lottery, but Antonio had purchased it for me. It was mine, free and clear. I didn't even have to hit the lottery. I was ecstatic. Antonio named the Jaguar Lady. He said she was beautiful, luxurious, and powerful, just like the perfect lady. And Lady was absolutely perfect. Not only that, but she signaled a shift in the hierarchy. Yes, Antonio had purchased a car for Sharon, but he didn't purchase that car for Sharon. He bought her a cute little domestic sedan that was good on gas, but it wasn't luxurious. My car was luxurious. That was the thing about Antonio. You always knew where you were in the value system based on what he was willing to do for you. He was willing to do a lot for me, and that let me know where I stood. I jumped on Antonio, wrapping my legs around his waist. "She's absolutely beautiful," I screamed. "Let's stay home today," said Antonio. I contemplated his request for a moment, but I had already promised Cassidy that I would do her hair at the salon. Of all the areas in which I had fallen short, the one thing that I tried to maintain was my relationship with Cassidy. I didn't want to disappoint her. I told Antonio that I had to go to work, but I would thank him properly when I returned home. He passed me the keys to the car and told me that he'd wash my dishes so I could go on to work. "Hurry up and get there so you can hurry up and get back," he said. Antonio told me that he would be there waiting for me upon my return. I grabbed my things from the house and kissed him goodbye. I sat behind the wheel of my brand new car, overwhelmed with happiness and excitement. I turned on the ignition. To my surprise, "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" was playing softly through the speakers. I looked at Antonio. He was smiling ear to ear. I smiled as well. Not only has he purchased a car for me, but he had also purchased the Whitney Houston CD and inserted it for that very moment. You have to understand my way of thinking. Money was nothing to Antonio. He spent money all day. But I fell in love with the way he loved me. His smile informed me that he was happy to have made me happy. I can't even describe the love that I felt for him in that moment, and I didn't think he could possibly do anything to top that feeling. But he did. He always did. "I was thinking," said Antonio, "what do you think about going to Hawaii?" And that's when I knew that Sharon was number 2. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.